to Grade 9 PAT, Preparation Survival Guide. This session was previously recorded and provided by Jody Taylor at the Calgary Regional Professional Development Consortia and Charlie Craig at Learning Network Educational Services. For more information, please reach out to your local consortia office as they would be happy to help you with this or any of your other learning needs. PAT is broken into two parts, Part A and Part B. And so I'm going to speak specifically around that Part B, the reading comprehension piece. And then Jody's going to take it away for the Part A. And in retrospect, maybe we should have done it the other way around, but whatevs. And some of this stuff is not going to be new. Because we really want to reinforce that there's just some really great things you can be doing in your classroom that are going to build skills for these students to function in and do well on this standardized testing space. And I think there's power in not teaching to the test, but teaching understanding and comfort. So when students are asked to do these types of tasks, that they feel like they can be successful with them. So
I also think, sorry, Charlie, I'm just going to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
Around the idea of taking standardized tests, kids need our patience and our kindness to support their wellness in that environment. They may not be used to that environment. A lot of them are not familiar with that environment at all. And in speaking with grade 6, 9, and 12 teachers right now, kids are freaking out about some of these tests. So we need to approach it with kindness and with patience and maybe little bites at a time. But because this is, like Charlie said, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is best practice overall. And because this is kind of a first aid, like, okay, let's just get what we need. That's where we were directing it. But I think that there is also a place for all of us to take pause and just be like, okay, the kids have not really sat in this environment potentially, so let's just have some moments to let them be comfortable. So I just wanted to kind of bring that attention to that environment that the kids are not used to being in right now.
I think that's a great reminder. Thanks, Jody. So it might seem really silly as a place to start, but one of the best ways that you can support students in that Part B is to actually make time for reading in your classroom. And so building in 10 to 15 minutes of time as daily as you can. I get that it can't happen all the time because, life, but as frequently as you can to offer reading time is super, super important. And the more you can do to help students find texts that are interesting and engaging, the better. And so if you don't have a classroom library, schedule time for your kiddos to go down to the school library, get to know your students and their interests so that when they are saying, I have nothing to read, then you can say, oh, okay, well, I found this great book and it's about basketball. I know you're on the basketball team. Give it a whirl. Or, hey, I often see you reading comics. Would you be interested in this graphic novel? Very similar, just a little bit longer in structure. The other thing that you can do, particularly if you're in a small town or rural school setting, but also totally applicable to Calgary, is encourage your kiddos to get a public library card. Most, if not all, locations now offer free public library cards. Many public libraries will work with you as a teacher to help coordinate and get your kiddos armed with a public library card. And what I use my public library card for is accessing audiobooks. I don't like reading books on my phone. That just feels weird. I use an e-reader, but that's about as techie as I get as far as books go. But some kids really enjoy reading on their phones. But audiobooks are like an easy win if you're wanting kiddos to access text. So if you can support them in getting a public library card, that's a win. If you have book talks or books that you've recently read that you can share with your students about why they might like them, like 2 minutes, that's all it takes to do a quick book talk, and then you throw it up on your ledge or on display, however you got your classroom set up, and then someone inevitably is going to come up and want to take that book because you've just spoken about it. You can also create routines and opportunities for students to promote their own reading preferences, whether that's a sticky note on the front that says recommended by Jody because, and then they have to give a little blurb, or opening up the book talk and saying, hey, anyone read something great lately that they want to recommend to the class? You can also find some good little book commercials on the YouTube. So if you just look up middle years or young adult book trailers or book commercials, you can often find stuff where someone else has recommended it. And you know what the kids are like. If someone on YouTube says it's cool, it's probably cool. At least that's what my children tell me. I highly recommend having conversations with students about what they're reading. So during that 10 to 15 minute time that the class is reading, you're bopping around and you're having little whisper conversations about the books. Doesn't matter if you've read it or not, because your job is just to ask questions. And the good news is you're going to know if they're actually reading the text or not based on how well they can answer your questions you're asking them. So if you say, tell me about what you're reading, and they're like, it's a book about a guy who does a thing, you know that they're probably not reading the book. But they might talk about, they might really get into it. And then from what they're telling you, you can ask some additional prompting questions. And so that's how you engage in conversation about books, build excitement about books, and not kill the joy with a reading log, because no one thinks that's fun. I found this really cool article, and I will also make sure to share this slide deck. You'll get a copy of the slide deck as well with the recording. But this teacher developed this routine with her class around reading accountability partners. So because she wasn't able to get to all the students all the time, she got to know her kiddos first and then figured out who could I partner with one another that would actually engage in a conversation about their reading in a positive and motivating sort of way. And so she gave them little scripts and mini lessons and talked to them about how you have conversations about books. And then every once in a while, after that 10 minutes, 2 minutes to meet with your reading accountability partner. She probably had a way funner name than that, but that's what it was. And then they would talk to their partner about what they're reading and what's happening in the book. And it's a great way to build a reading community. So if you don't do anything else from this session to prep your kiddos for the PAT or for whatever, do this. Let them read. Make time for reading. Make it count. The next thing that we suggest doing is look at the text questions as a text form. So just as you would look at a poem, look at a short story, look at a personal essay, look at a whatever, fill in the blank here, use the test questions as a structure that you're asking the students to analyze. And you could kick it off with some, two of our favorite questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? I would encourage them to do this with a partner or small group. You might have them do the thinking first on their own and then move into a partner or small group setting, just so that they're comfortable in making some of their own connections and questions. Also keeping that accountability piece, right? You're going to look kind of like an idiot if you show up and you have nothing to offer your group around what you're noticing and what you're wondering. The other thing that's great about notice and wonder is all students can be successful with that kind of a question. So it might be really obvious that there are numbers over here down the side of this poem, but for some students, that might be their notice and their wonder. I notice there's numbers down the side of the poem. I wonder what they're for, or I wonder why they're there. And that in itself is a key piece to understanding how to answer these questions. Um, and then really like using some of those same questions that you would use for any text structure. So who's the intended audience of these questions? Fun fact, grade 9 students, that's the intended audience. But that's an easy win, right? How is the author structuring the text? And by that, I mean the questions and then the sample um, text. It's a poem, short story, comic strip, etc. And then what are the key parts? Like if you had to label them for someone else to understand, what would you point out to them? And by using this as a structure to look at text forms, it becomes a little less stressful. Like we're just gonna let's figure out how this works before we start jumping in and you know stressing about the actual words in the questions. Let's just figure out how this functions.
I love that, Charlie, because I think that it also demystifies a lot of the, oh my gosh, I'm writing multiple choice tests. Maybe I haven't written this form before. What the heck? And I love that you're like, let's just approach this as a text structure first. Brilliant.
So in the slide deck, I've linked in this slide and another slide a number of released items that I found. Some of them are released and on the Alberta Ed website. Some of them are released and are found on miscellaneous teacher websites that may or may not be allowed to include that content, but I found it through the Google. So it's linked on that slide deck. Now, if you are like me, I inherited like the binder collection. I don't know why English language arts teachers put everything in
Just
the
wait and do it.
binders.
You're
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So in my binder collection, I inherited like reams of previously released test questions. So you might also be sitting on a gold mine of previously released content that you can use with your kiddos. The next place that if we're going to dig a little deeper in really beefing things up in preparation is to understand what are the reading skills that your students are going to encounter in this part B of the test. And huge shout out to our colleague Irene Heffel for digitally hoarding all of her resources because she shared this with me back when I was a grade 9 teacher. And I sent her an email. I was like, hey, Irene, any chance you still have this? And she's like, of course I still have this. So thank you, Irene. But all of these sticky notes are different reading skills that the students will have to be able to demonstrate in order to be successful on the test. Not that we want them to only be successful on the test, but these are reading skills they're going to need for like life. So it's not a bad thing to pick up on these skills. So what does it mean to infer? And some of them, like interpret, you'll notice in the black, there's other words that you might find used instead of the word interpret, but they all fall under that same umbrella of skill set. So you might sign something that says determine, but it might also say decide, or it might also say like complete this thought, or you know what I mean? So all of these here are different reading skills that you can include in other content that you're doing with your students. So my teaching partner and I used to do a short story unit on tales with twist endings. So we might highlight or focus on some of these reading skills in that particular unit. Some sort of a book club / novel study unit. We're going to have some tasks that focus on these skills. Oh snap, someone should probably read some poems. So we're going to bring in some poems and then we practice these skills. So you're doing these sorts of skills throughout the year in various ways. But those two slides highlight for you what those reading skills are that your students are going to be expected to do. Now, Jody in her section is going to talk a little bit more about the general bulletin and some of that stuff. But when you look at those released items, it gives you a blueprint around the types of skills and what types of text those skills are being used in. Um, so if you're curious at all, that those blueprints are a really great place to go to figure that out. And it'll say like synthesize and analyze was in these questions here, and it made up this percentage of the test. The next place to go is key terms and concepts. Now, these would all have been pulled out of the actual curriculum document. Remembering, of course, that the PATs are designed to capture the learning that's happened in the last 3 years. So it's designed to catch concepts from grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9. So you might not recognize some of these pieces directly from your outcomes because they might have been part of grade 8 or grade 7, but there are questions, or there have been questions that reference these concepts on the grade 9 PAT. Of course, I would not just give students a list of these concepts and make them write a definition and then have them memorize it. Like that helps nobody. But if I know that we're going to talk about, or they're going to need to understand what irony is, or they're going to need to understand the different kinds of conflict, or they have to know what a hyperbole is or a metaphor, I'm going to make sure that as we're doing some of that other content, short stories, poems, novels, whatever, informational text, that I'm highlighting or focusing on some of these concepts through those texts throughout the year. Now, one of the easiest wins, and it's actually kind of fun, is to do something around comic strip analysis. So if you don't have a comic strip analysis assignment or project, or however you structure your classroom, in kind of your mix of grade 9 stuff, I would highly recommend including it because not only does it address grade 9 language arts, but it helps feed into social studies where they look at political cartoons as a text form. So there is a little cross-curricular work happening there. But spending a little bit of time looking at, and the kids know a lot of this stuff. So it's really just calling it to mind. Like, what does it mean when the speech bubble actually looks like clouds? What does it mean when there's like symbols above their head? What does it mean when there's birds circling above their head? So they know what all of these different things are that happen in comic strips. But if you address it with them and have them practice, then when they get to the comic strip in the test, because there will guaranteed be a comic strip, probably two, that's an easy win for your kiddos because they know it and they know they've practiced it with you. Quest A Plus, if you're not familiar with it at all, it is also linked in the slide deck, but it allows you to go and practice test questions. So grade 9 tests, English language arts, and then there's content here that they can access. Multiple choice, A, B, C, D. Okay. So it's totally acceptable to take your kiddos to the lab, if that's a thing, or get the cart of Chromebooks and have them do some practice using the Quest A Plus, just again to build that familiarity and comfort with the structure. The next thing that I highly recommend doing is some low stakes practice. And what I mean by this is we are not marking this. We're not collecting this information at all. Teach your students how to tackle this. So I would always do almost like a think aloud. Like, here's what I do when I get a multiple choice test. I don't even look at the questions to start. I just read through the text. Then I go to the questions. Then I go back to the text and read it again. And as I'm reading it, I might find an answer to one of those questions. Maybe I make a star, maybe I highlight it, draw a circle, whatever, right? Because you can write all over this thing. And And I show them how you have to navigate between two pieces of paper, because that in itself seems really silly that we would have to break it down to that level, but we really have to break it down to that level. So I'm going to put this paper here, and I'm going to have this paper here, and I'm going to look back and forth. And you explain it to them, and then you practice it. I encourage you to have students work with partners or small groups. Okay. Um, and then you teach them. If the question references a line, like, oh, snap, my mouse moved. There we go. Question 12 here on the screen. In lines 14 to 20, the poet enhances the ideas presented through the use of. Well, I'm actually going to go over back to the text, find lines 14 to 20, and I'm going to reread it. If that doesn't help, I'm going to read the ones before it and then the ones after it. But I know the answer lies somewhere in that chunk. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it in the question. Teach them how to eliminate the incorrect responses. The ones that you know are, it's definitely not that, exit out. And then I would have them with their partners or small groups explain their answer. So it's not enough to say that for question number 12, the answer is simile. How do you know? How do you know it's simile? And if you're in a situation where your friend is like, no, that's totally personification, duke it out verbally, not physically, around
Oh,
why that is. I know. Although that could be fun too,
get
Don't
right?
say
soccer
that to my
poppers.
kids.
Did you ever have soccer poppers when you were a kid?
No.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, Google it later.
Okay. This could
It'll
be
change
fun.
your life.
So anytime that you can create low stakes practice, now you could spend, sure, you could spend a whole block doing this, but you don't need to. So notice here we have a poem that's 26 lines long, and we've got 4 questions that go with it. Poem on one side of your piece of paper, questions on the other side of the piece of paper. 10 minutes, we're going to start our class with this activity, and then we'll move it on to something else. And there's enough released items that I've linked in the slide deck that this could carry you, like, you do this once a week throughout the school year. Or now that we realize what time of year it is, maybe we do it more than once a week just to get things going. But don't be afraid to offer actual practice.
Just for low stakes practice, do you have any advice on getting kids to actually put their best effort into it? Because I teach in a very small classroom. I have 4 LA9 students. So when one of them says, well, if it's not for marks, it's not worth doing, that kind of permeates out. So
Right.
if I tell them, like, this is practice, I'm done. And I'm like, it has been 60 seconds. You haven't even read the poem in 60 seconds.
I know that this is you're not alone in experiencing this as
Of
a
course.
post-pandemic response to learning. Is that how I could best describe that?
Yeah.
Um, and this is where you know your students best.
Yeah.
Um, and this is being recorded, so I can't be too flippant here. But like, if they say they're only gonna do it because it's worth marks, okay, it's worth all of the marks then. All of
I
them.
mean, yeah, that's kind of how I've approached it is I've said I'm going to mark out of all of whenever it's a practice thing, I'm like, I'm going to mark 3 out of the 15 we're going to do, but I'm not telling you which 3.
Mhm.
And
Well,
then
you know what, Ryan? There is space too for, because what I see in classrooms is that kids are a little more immature than they used to be. So what works for like grade 6s is working great for grade 9s right now. So if they want to compete, or if they want to earn a little prize, or if you want a piece of candy, you know what? Yes, I get that it's not intrinsic motivation, that I'm just driven to know what a hyperbole is. But you know what? For now, extrinsic motivators might be the way that you need to go. So, okay, kiddos, I have a chocolate bar. And I have had kids who won't do a darn thing for anything else. But holy moly, if you find their lane of extrinsic motivator to start with, and then once they start to feel some success, I think that there is some momentum that you can get through that as well. But like turning this into a Kahoot, and we do it like as a game, yay, you won, or whatever. I'm not like, I'm not proud. I'll do whatever it takes to get the kids to do what I need them to do on the day. So yes, it would be great if they were motivated just by the learning. You know what? If they want a bouncy ball, here's your bouncy ball. But don't give it to them until they're leaving.
Jeopardy, structuring a Jeopardy type game.
Yeah.
Like I have seen groups of grade 9 students become highly competitive
Yeah.
around something like any kind of game that you could turn it into. Um, you obviously like your students best around how this works. At the end of the day, I mean, I've had kiddos that were super engaged in relative term, adequately engaged during class time, and then literally drew a Christmas tree on their bubble sheet for the PAT and thought they were like the funniest guy. Now thankfully for him, he grew up a little bit and is a very successful man. But at the time in grade 9, the bubble tree Christmas tree, I was super not excited about that.
Yeah.
So
Bless their sweet little hearts.
we do the best we can.
Yeah.
The other part is the texts that you pick. So if you come across a released item and you're like, wow, that was painful to read, I wouldn't pick that one to do with your class. Poems are easy to digest because they appear short and simple, even though we all know they're anything but simple. Comic strip questions are probably your best place to start. And there are some. And so if you can start there and get them kind of in this routine of practicing, and like Jody said, okay, you're going to break off into partners, and you get someone gets a prize for this, or you earn this, or I'm marking 3, but I'm not telling you which ones, or whatever you need to do to make it happen and make it work for you, I think is justifiable professional decision making.
There you go. Well, and honestly, one of the most popular rewards I've ever had is a 5-minute get out of jail free card. I mean, class early or whatever. So like 5 minutes early before lunch is like gold. You can go get your stuff out of your locker and be at your favorite place to sit. Or at the end of the day, if one day out of a million, one of my kids leaves class 5 or 10 minutes early, it's not going to disrupt the whole school. But oh my gosh, they coveted it. And it cost me nothing. I'm like, sure, whoever wins this is getting to leave 10 minutes early today. And they're like, seriously? Yep. Sure.
My administrator ears are not listening to that.
Yeah, don't listen, Charlie.
No.
Because I'm that teacher that you would have had in your office for sure.
All right. So the next strategy or activity to work with your kiddos around kind of this test preparation is, what do I do when I get to words I don't know what they mean? For the most part, the texts are purposely designed to be accessible for most students, but there are going to be words that they don't know. So I took this paragraph out of a released item and I selected the word notoriety. Teaching your students some sort of a routine related to unknown words is super helpful. So the first thing we're going to ask ourselves is, does this word remind you of any other words? Do you see any prefixes or suffixes that can help you kind of figure this out? Do you even know what the word is? Like, can you sound it out to yourself? Like whisper read it to yourself? Can you use your context clues to guess what that word means based on what's around it? And if you've got any English as additional language learners, ask them to think about their home language. So when you look at this word, does it remind you of any words in your home language? And I happened to look up notoriety in Spanish and French, and something else that I thought would be like and all of them had very similar spellings. So encouraging them to think in their home language is a really good strategy for any students who, English is the additional. That's one way that you can look and approach unfamiliar words with your students. And this idea of using context clues and guessing, like that is not raw, that's not new for any of them. That's something, we've been teaching since teeny tiny grades. And so for them to hear that again and go, oh, like I can still use that strategy is sometimes all they need to know. If you're looking to build vocabulary development though, and you want a strategy or structure to use throughout the year, I highly recommend doing work around word inquiry. And you always base it in text. Because like then we're connecting it to text, so that makes a lot of sense as a language arts teacher. But B, it also provides you with like context to help figure out the definition or meaning. So it's a very simple routine. They have to pick a word from the text. Now, you could obviously teach this with a gradual release where you teach them how to do this strategy first, and then eventually they're picking their own words that they want to investigate and take apart. But they pick a word, then ask themselves, how is it built? So what is the base part of the word? And then what are the affixes? And can we take that apart in some kind of a word sum to figure out, oh, here's the main part, and these parts were added onto it to make this word that I'm looking at. And then what you do is you have them flesh out and brainstorm other parts of the word family. So if the word that I pick is liking, say, and they know that it's like, L-I-K-E plus I-N-G, then they would brainstorm all the other words they can think of with like in them. Liked, likes, unlike, relike? I don't know if that's a word. On and on and on. And then you teach them how to go to different references. My favorite is Edam Online, and you put in the word and it tells you the story of the word, where that word came from, and other words that it might be connected to. So developing a routine in your classroom that helps you flesh out and expand their vocabulary is a really great strategy to use all year long to help your kiddos really just grow the words that they know. And in that slide, I've linked a couple of resources, and I'll throw a couple more in before we send it out to folks, just so you get a sense of what that is. This particular work around morphology is my current pet project. So if you want to know more about it, feel free to email me and I'll help you out. Which brings us to writing.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
So, like Charlie mentioned at the start of this session, we are not advocates of teaching to the test. We are not saying that writing instruction in grade 9 or all through high school or middle school should be focused on what the PAT or diploma exam is going to require. If anything, that is the opposite of how I like to teach my classes. I do not want to spend all my days every day writing only functional writing essays and ignoring the story component because essays have a formula that I can access easier. Unfortunately, I think that sometimes as teachers, we do that, focus overly muchly on only the structures that will make kids successful on standardized tests. And writing is a lane where I think that kids suffer the most. They start to see writing only as something that is a function of just this kind, just this formula. I'm going to plug in these components, and writing is boring and awful. And if anything, I, in my own teaching, lean into it being the opposite of that. It is a place for personal expression, exploration. And how do we do that? A volume of ungraded, as often as possible writing is an amazing way to access that. So prefacing this section with that idea is important to me because now I'm going to talk about writing to a specific audience, which is the markers of the PAT. So because we have released items, because we have a specific rubric, we know what they're looking for. They're going to mark you on that standard. How do we achieve what those markers as our audience are looking for? So please, anyone who is viewing this, do not now start to do only PAT prep in this lane because, oh my goodness, who wants to only write to this? But PATs exist, they cause anxiety for students. So knowing that, how can we prepare? So part one, I think this slide is animated, Charlie. So you're gonna have to clickety click, maybe. There we go. So part one of this section. So this is from the Alberta Ed Education Bulletin that is released every year. So it's going to look remarkably the same year to year, but there are some little breadcrumbs within that bulletin that are worth looking at. So it is worth going to Alberta Ed every year, finding this bad boy and taking a look, because there are little changes that happen to the rubric, to little tidbits of what they found last year and what we could address better as teachers the next year. So it is worth, and the link to this will be embedded in the slide deck, I think probably in the speaker notes. So where the blue arrow is talking about reading instructions and reading the assignment. So I have a slide coming up that's going to address that, but it should not be your kid's first time seeing that when they sit down to write the test. Planning using the pages is provided. We're going to talk about ways to plan and ways to plan that kids can do quickly that are simple. Keeping in mind the characteristics of effective writing, that second blue arrow, it's important that we're doing this all year long in our writing and reading instructions. So awareness of audience, appropriateness of tone and use of correct language is something they're going to be marked on in their writing. It's also a really important thing for them to recognize when they're reading. Enough detail to fulfill your purpose and your completeness of information and the relevance of your information, and clarity. Proofreading your work and correcting your errors directly on your first draft. So really explicitly showing kids that in those released items, there are corrections that have been made at times. Your markers up in Edmonton will be generous to you if you have shown an outline that shows where you wanted to go if you run out of time. They will be generous to you if you have shown an effort to correct your errors. So just making sure that kids realize that they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So please put down on the page as much of your thinking as you can. So we'll go to the next slide. Oh yeah, so my little thought bubble. Charlie talked about speech bubbles during her little thing on comic strips. Little speech bubble on the right-hand side here. It says that you can use reference materials, dictionaries, and thesauruses when you're doing your writing. And this little thing saying here, what are the chances of a student using a brand new word appropriately within their writing? So the number of times that I've given a kid a dictionary or thesaurus and they pull out of their hat the most magical 27-syllable word that does not make any sense. So what we're striving for here is clarity. So yes, they are allowed to use a dictionary of thesaurus or a thesaurus, but that last tidbit here, be careful not to overuse them. Oh my goodness, please no. I would rather read a piece of writing that is clear and to the point than one that has 150 point word from Scrabble over and over again. It's going to impact whether or not it's clear. And when we're looking at the released items, which we're going to do in a minute, those people don't overuse 57,000 point words. They are clear, concise, to the point, bang, done. So I don't lean into teaching that explicitly overly muchly. We can go to the next one, Charlie. So reading the assignment. This assignment page looks strikingly similar to the one that I wrote back in the day as a student in the province of Alberta. They don't change this much. So students should not be surprised at the format of this description and instructions. They should know exactly where to find all of the pieces of what is expected, and they should not have to take a whole bunch of time on this during their test. So you should show them this page in advance. You can annotate key instructions here. Get out your pens, get out your highlighters. What is it actually asking you to do? How much is each of these worth? There should be no surprises about what's coming and what the expectations are. And that's the exact same thing we're going to do with the rubric as well. So if we go to the next slide, the idea of planning is not something that any student that I have ever taught loves to do. But when we show them the released items and then the achievement of different students, there is a clear connection between a lot of those released items that get a great mark, have a really precise plan, and the ones who maybe are not as great do not often have a great plan. So keeping that in mind, if we want them to be successful with any writing that they do, and coming back to motivating them to do it at all, I've done essay assignments where I only mark their outline. I don't make you write the whole thing. Give me a great outline, show me where your thinking was going, bang, done. Okay, so practicing that skill and showing that I value that planning as much as I value the writing, that process of writing is important. So I'm going to, and then getting down ideas somewhere and organizing them before you write, especially if they're feeling a little bit nervous or worried about a testing scenario. If you just sit down, see the prompt, and get your ideas down somewhere, it can make them feel a lot better. And then they're less likely to lose their path once they start writing. And also making sure they draw their attention back to the prompt. And before they write their 4 pages of stuff, check your outline and your organization or your 6-box organizer, which I'm going to show you in a second. Did you address what the prompt was asking you to do? If you do your organizer, it takes you 10 minutes. And if you look at your organizer and you're like, I'm not really talking about what they're asking me to do, you haven't lost 2 hours. You've lost 10 minutes. Do that sucker again. Charlie, what did you want to say?
Well, I was just going to add that I found particularly at this point in the year, because we've done a lot of writing and, as much as I always intended to do, I mean, I did iterative teaching, but I still felt in junior high, like it became unitized, and I still really never figured out how to ununitize a lot of my planning. And so we, do writing at the beginning of the year, and then we take a little break with and do some reading stuff, and then we do some more writing, blah, blah, blah. So by the time it came to prep, I didn't spend a lot of time practicing writing because they could all write.
Yeah.
I spent my time practicing the 10 minutes of planning, the brainstorming, the figuring it all out. And the other thing I remind them is you have 10 minutes, and in that 10 minutes, you can talk to other people. So it's not like you're planning in isolation. You can plan and then say to your neighbor, hey, do you think my plan matches the prompt? You can say, hey, what was that acronym to remember how to write a functional writing thing again? Oh, right. And you write it down. So teaching them that in that 10 minutes, they can talk to one another is huge. And we would just practice brainstorming, planning, and get that down so they felt confident to build from that plan the writing part of things.
Love it. All right, so this is the best story map that I ever learned how to teach kids. And it looks like a little bit of a hot mess here, but it's actually super easy. So what you do is you don't draw like your plot diagram, but that's essentially what this is. So the kids draw either fold. It's a really great place to find out if they know about fractions. So you can fold your page into 6, or you can draw 6 boxes. Then they start with box number 1. How am I going to introduce this piece of writing? Usually I'm going to try and bring in characters and setting, and throughout the year, when we're doing our little reading book talks or when we're doing our little mentor texts with all of our other pieces of reading that we've done throughout the year, we're going to draw attention to how does this author introduce their characters? How does this author bring setting to the table? Then when they're doing their planning, they already know how they could introduce a story. Box 2 is your inciting incident. It is a conflict or problem that starts. It needs to have your prompt in mind. So explicitly teaching them what kinds of things can happen in a story that I need to address the impact of personal responsibility in someone's life. Okay, so how am I going to have a conflict or problem that addresses that? They don't then follow on to the next box beside. They go down to the end of the story. So I started a problem. How am I going to solve it? Because otherwise, our beloved little treasures are going to go off into the storyland and it's going to weave and go back and forth. And then they're like, and then everyone died at the end, right? We've all read books where we're like, I hated that ending. Why did they end it that way? So I think that the thing that I love about this story map, other than it's simple, is that we're starting with the end in mind. So I started a problem. How am I going to solve that thing? So once they do box 3, then you cycle back from there. Okay, well, if that's how my problem was solved, that's my ending. How do I need to wrap that up with a climax? Okay, well, how did I get to that climax? Okay, well, how am I going to link the inciting incident to that part? So working it backward that way, the stories that kids have created for me are so much more coherent. And as far as looking at, we need to write to a PAT prompt or idea or theme, bringing that to the table and like, okay, box number 2, I need to start a problem that's going to address this situation, and I need to solve that problem in a way that makes sense. Much more successful using something like
I
this.
love this. I love this because you can connect it to a structure they already know, like somebody wanted but so,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a little bit like you could scaffold it up. The other
Yeah.
thing I love about this is no one is going to end their story with, and I woke up and it was all a dream.
Oh, God.
We take a pledge
That's my other favorite.
in my class that we will thou shalt not wake up and it's all a dream, because
Yeah.
I will haunt them if that happens. Um, the other thing I really like about this, and I think you could do this as you work through it, is you're creating a space where you can coach students through writing what they know.
Yeah.
None of you in grade 9 have become drug addicts on the streets and then miraculously recovered from addiction, and like went on to live your beautiful life. None of you have done that. So maybe let's not write about that, because good news, the markers know that you have no idea what you're talking about. So if we can take this structure and coach them through, so, what is the prompt saying? Okay, now how are you connecting this to what you already know, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not waking up from dreams, and we're not putting ourselves in scenarios where we drop out of high school and make enough money to live on our own at the age of whatever imaginary age they've come up
Yeah.
with. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then each of these boxes really is an easy place for me to enter in with a mentor text. And I'm going to show you Penny Kittle's box in a sec, or book in a second. But she's got some brilliant little lessons around micro mentor texts where you're introducing sensory detail to bring in your setting, or using dialogue to get everything moving along. So those little mentor text mini lessons fit in really easily within the larger map. So, and it's easy to generate on the test. And another plan that's easy to generate on the test. So that was for story. So if they're going to lean into narrative, that structure for planning works well for narrative. For me, I find that different structures work well for planning an essay. So if they're going to lean into essay, and a lot of the mentor texts or released examples that we're going to find on the Alberta Ed website or the covert blacklist websites that Charlie's going to show you, kids lean into outline or they lean into mind map. Two roads that lead to the same place. So you're going to think about your introduction, think about your conclusion, and think about your body paragraphs if you're writing an essay, partially because that's how the essays that we need for this exam are most accessible to kids through that structure. Is it the best structure ever for writing an essay that speaks to the passion of kids? No. Are we going to find essays out in the real world that lean into this structure? Not so much, really. But again, keeping in mind who is the audience for this piece of writing and what is my purpose to get marks on this rubric for this purpose, the rubric explicitly looks for an introduction and conclusion. So you know what? Spoon feed to your markers. Hey, look, I did an introduction. Hey, look, I did a conclusion. I've got the hamburger there in the bottom left corner because for some kids, that idea that I need all the parts of my hamburger for it to be cohesive speaks to them. I actually knew a teacher who made hamburgers that matched a kid's essay. So if you didn't have an introduction, you didn't get a top bun. If you didn't have enough meat in the middle, you only got a top bun and a slice of cheese. So like for it to be a juicy, meaty burger, you need all the parts and then teaching them what all of those are. And you know what? If that's the hook that's going to bring kids to the table to write an essay with all the parts in it, okay.
That is genius.
It's pretty
I
funny.
freaking love it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, Jody, but I mean, one thing I found is that now this could be the school context I was in because we focused as a school on writing for a number of years. So I didn't realize that writing was actually the more challenging of the two PAT portions for
Yeah.
most schools. I didn't know that. So me and my own little bubble. But one of the things I found, it was really hard for kiddos with their writing skills and knowledge to nail out a solid essay in a single draft. And I often found with students that I would coach or guide them towards a narrative structure because inherently they've had more practice with that throughout the grades. So we're at least building on some background knowledge by saying, if you're not sure, write a story, write a narrative.
And I love that you're bringing that up, Charlie, because I think that every school is different. The school that I come from leans into essay. They write essays from grade 6 onward. And I'm not going to say how I feel about that. But if you know what your teacher before you has taught, right? This is a piece of writing that leans into what kids are supposed to have done for the last 3 years. If your school evenly splits it between narrative and essay, awesome. Then give them the choice between both. But if you know that your school, like if you're in a school like Charlie's where kids lean into story writing in middle school or junior high, definitely guide them in that direction, right? And find out, how did the teacher before you teach dialogue? How did the teacher before you teach character development? And then bring that to the table. Hey guys, you already know how to do a bunch of this. We're just putting it together to address a given prompt. If you're at a school like mine and you know that teachers are talking hamburger and they're talking outline, they're talking thesis, bang, 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 and puking out 5-paragraph essays for years, let's lean into whatever's going to make the kids successful in the place where you're teaching. So I think that that's an awesome point to bring up. Ask the kids, what have you done, right? What do you know? And probably they're going to say, I don't know, we didn't write last year. Funny, I brought in Miss Craig and she's telling me that you sure did. Let's talk more about that. All right, I'm going to let you do this one, Charlie.
Okay, so I know that they don't write a business letter anymore. It is now an email.
That
All
got me last year.
the only difference that means is they don't have to write an envelope anymore. For the most part, it's a business letter structure in an email format. The easiest way to teach this to your kiddos is to get them to remember BP dog. So it's 3 paragraphs. BP is your background and purpose. Who are you and why are you writing this email? Then details and operations. What is it that they need to know? And what is it that what are the logistics that you're asking them to do? Because almost all of the prompts have some sort of and you're asking Pat Smith, because it's always some sort of generic, non-gendered name, to do for you, whether it's to attend an event, whether it's to provide you with fundraising, whether it's to, petition for something to happen. So what are the details and things that they need to know? And the last bit is the goodwill closing. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you. You can reply to this email address, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where, as long as, in your case, around 1 of the 4 kids can remember BP dog, they are set for that planning time. But I would often, we're heading into the 10 minutes of planning. If you're not sure what you need to write in your functional writing thing, find someone who does. Find someone who remembers what BP dog means and break it apart. So if you can go through this structure with your kiddos in relation to some practice brainstorm prompt writing, it's an easy way to remember that functional writing structure. Background and purpose, details and operations, goodwill closing.
And they no longer have to do like the addressing either, like on the envelope or on the email. That's correct? Okay.
I believe so. It's just the
Yep.
guts of the
Yeah.
email.
Okay. Nobody told me last year, so I trained my kiddos on it. And then they walked in there like, this says email. And I was like, what do you mean it says email?
One of
Yeah.
those nuggets from the released items bulletin for the year that's just embedded in there, like, oh yeah, yes, it's an email.
Yeah. Last year was my first year teaching, so that
Yeah.
was a fun
Yeah.
jump in feet first.
That's a fun journey no matter what, Orion. If that's the only place where you're like, oh crap, then you had a great first year teaching.
But I told them, don't do it. Just
Yeah.
write the business letter the way
Yeah,
I
it's
taught you,
all
but
the
leave
same.
out all the extras.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
If it makes you feel any better, I got to the end of one of my first years of teaching grade 9 and realized they change the rubric every year. And so I had been marking with the rubric I inherited. Yeah, let's photocopy hundreds of those so I don't have to copy anything ever again. And then we get the one that's released with the test. And I was like, wait, hold the bus. This is not the same. I mean, for the most part, they're very similar in nature, but there's some wordsmithing that happens that could shift performance scales, right? So always check out the general bulletin with the released rubric and expectations, because you're right, things can change.
A teacher who I thought was brilliant had kids practice this by writing to celebrities or businesses to see if they could get stuff for free or if they could get a reply. So it was kind of like one of those games, right? Where like, okay, I'm going to write to whoever their celebrity of choice is, sports stars, or choose a company saying, and then exactly following this format, right? Here's my background. Here's my purpose. Here's what I want from you. Thank you so much for your time. And it is crazy, some of the stuff that they can get. And then it's fun, right?
That's
So
awesome. Here's a word of wisdom for you folks. So I did a series of, introducing the business letter, and I used letters from a nut. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those books, but they're collections of letters and responses that this comedian sent to businesses and would ask for like the most ridiculous things. So we built like a series of business letters that were just nonsensical. Like, I'm afraid of heights, but I really want the penthouse suite. Could you please arrange for the penthouse suite to be relocated on the ground floor? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a joke. It was meant to be a joke.
amazing.
Well, fast forward to the actual written, like this is off to Edmonton. And one of the students, for whatever reason, had that in their head that we were still like being ridiculous. And so their PAT at that time business letter, they sounded like a crazy person. Like it made no sense. And I was like, this can't be happening right now. And yeah, so her request letter for whatever it was, town council, principal, whatever, was just like way out in left field, totally fit with that unit that we did. And looking at that as a mentor text, but in retrospect, perhaps poorly planned.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so just as a heads up on that.
So as Charlie mentioned, using the current version of the rubric is a good idea. The link there is to this year's ELA 9 subject bulletin. So you can go ahead and click on that on your own and have a look at what is in there. It takes you through all the stuff and things, and it is like a scavenger. So you're going to have to set aside a good chunk of time. And like we teach the kids to do, we also need to be going through this as teachers, just making sure what has been maybe changed, what was tweaked. Important reminders under writing might be a thing that we want to have a look at. So just going through this methodically and looking for things that we didn't already know. That's also showing which outcomes from the curriculum are being addressed with each part of the rubric. So for those of you doing outcomes-based assessment, that might be a thing where you want to pay some attention. All of the categories onto one page for kids to be able to reference and for us to also be able to mark. So it was an easy way to see what are they looking for at each level. It prints nicely on one of those like legal size pieces of paper. The other side here is a link to released items for English language arts. So we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to mentor texts that we can dig into and use with kids. So we can compare different samples that receive different marks. So this was the prompt. What are the differences between these essays or these stories? Because they give both. One that I like, and Kim Tackleberry that I work with at TRC also likes, is a clothesline activity. So give them a pile and say, which ones out of this pile do you think are the best? And which ones are not the best? And then tell me why, or tell each other why. Or pick one category on the rubric. So if it's content, what makes the content of this one better than the content of that one? And then annotate the examples. This book is magic. And I love that. I mean, we talked about when we were talking about the story map, the pieces of story that you can explicitly teach. She has pieces of mentor text in the book, so you don't have to go on a scavenger hunt to find it. They're in there. And then she talks about studying that little passage. She has the notice part done for you already, where it's like, ooh, I noticed that this person used whatever in this excerpt. And the idea of using a very small mentor text, which can make it more accessible to kids who might not be super motivated to read a whole piece of text. So we can take this methodology, which is sound methodology, regardless of what we're doing. So if we're doing one of our little book talks, like Charlie talked about doing a book talk to sell kids on a book, we could pull a passage out of one of our book talk books and use it as a mentor text for writing as well. Or kids could pull out a piece of text and say, hey, this was a really cool piece of writing in this book, and here's why I think it's cool. And then what you do is study the passage. You, as the teacher, write your own passage that copies the moves of the mentor text, and then you invite students to do the same. So it's notice, imitate, and then your turn. So if we go to the next slide, what moves does this author make? So the prompt for this piece was the importance of taking personal responsibility in one's life. So if we worked this through with the class, this is just the introduction clipped out of an essay. I may or may not tell the kids what the mark this person got was, or that's something maybe we can do next. But I can put this up on a screen, or I can put it on Google Classroom and they can all pull it up. And we can look at this. Okay, imagine life without any responsibilities, no rules, no limitations. We would have the freedom to pursue our heart's desires. This may sound like utopia. However, what would happen when individual needs differ or come into conflict with each other? A life without responsibilities could also result in chaos and insecurity. So read it all through. What do we notice? Work on it with a partner, work in groups, think, pair, share, whatever you want to do, right? Then I would sit and write one of these myself. So I might say one thing that I notice is that this author has used a really interesting hook. By the time I get to the end of the third sentence, I'm like, oh, that is a really interesting thought, that we're pursuing our heart's desires, but there also might be something about responsibility. They've used some sentences and then a question. So I would then emulate in my own writing with them watching. I'm going to try and write this about the importance of taking personal responsibility. I'm going to use 2 or 3 sentence statements, and I'm going to have a question. So I would work that out. When I'm doing mentor writing for a class, I don't always make mine perfect. Sometimes I make mine crap. And then I say, I don't know if mine is as good as our mentor text. How could we change it? Because I'm showing the vulnerability that I don't necessarily do the perfect job the first time, every time either. So let's fix it together. And then we would have the students try and write an introduction using the same craft words as craft moves as this author. So if we go to the next slide, this is the plan that author used that is also available in the released items. So this author has clearly used an outline for their essay. So how did this author plan? Well, they used an outline. How might doing that planning have helped in writing their introduction? So when we look at their introduction, they mention all of the pieces that they're going to do in their essay. How would they know what those were going to be? Well, they made a plan. Then without looking at the full essay, what mark, just reading that introduction and looking at this outline, what mark do we think they're going to get? If they follow this thing all the way through, why do we think they might get a proficient? Why do we think they might get a satisfactory? And then tell me why. Predict. Now, I know that this is really hard to read because it's clipped onto a slide, but in the actual example, it's really clear to be able to read what this kid has planned out. And this is a place where if, for whatever reason, even though everyone now gets 4 hours, if they run out of time, let's just say they're obsessed with whether or not their printing is perfect and they don't get to the end, this is a great place to talk about this writer. If they didn't get to the end, as a marker, I can say, hey, they were headed in the right direction. I know that they did the thinking in advance. And this is your rationale for why do the planning.
I basically did a station rotation with the prompts. And so I had about 4 or 5 different prompts throughout the room, and they had to circulate through, and they planned at 10-minute intervals for each one. And then, we talked about, what did you plan? What did you plan? How did you figure this out? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, had I had your structure, your 6-box structure, that would have been game changer, I believe. Because it provides a really clear direction of where you're going. But it's helpful just to practice that planning part.
Love that
And the
idea
other
of
piece,
station rotation, Charlie. And the idea that moving through stations is a thing. Middle school, high school, still awesome, still use it. It's great. Also, please feel free to reach out, even if you just watched the recording. And if questions arose for you during the recording, email Charlie.
well played. Thanks, Jody.
Yeah, anytime, buddy.